The salt-stained cottage sat crooked against the Maine coastline, its shutters hanging like broken wings. Sarah Chen clutched the rusty keys, her 8-month belly straining against her winter coat as she pushed open the door that shouldn't have been affordable. $250 for waterfront property should have been her first warning. The floorboards groaned under her weight as she stepped inside, immediately hit by the metallic smell that made her stomach lurch. But Sarah wasn't just another broke, expectant mother desperate for shelter. She was a former crime scene investigator who'd fled her old life after witnessing something that destroyed her career and nearly her sanity. Now, staring at the dark stains seeping through the living room walls, her trained eye recognized what the cellar had tried so hard to hide. This wasn't just water damage. These were blood patterns, fresh ones. Her baby kicked violently as footsteps echoed from the basement below, footsteps that meant she wasn't alone in this house of horrors. The cellar's nervous laughter suddenly made perfect sense. But why had someone been so desperate to get rid of this place that they'd practically given it away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, trying to calm the baby's frantic movements. Every fiber of her being screamed to run, but her legs felt rooted to the warped floorboards. 3 months of sleeping in her car, surviving on gas station snacks and the dwindling remains of her savings, had brought her to this moment. She had nowhere else to go. Footsteps below stopped abruptly, as if whoever was down there had suddenly become aware of her presence above. Sarah held her breath, straining to listen. The silence was somehow worse than the sound had been. She forced herself to think like the investigator she used to be before everything fell apart. The blood spatter on the wall showed a medium-velocity pattern, consistent with blunt force trauma. The discoloration suggested it was maybe a week old, possibly less. Someone had tried to clean it, but hadn't known about luminol testing or how blood seeps into porous surfaces. A soft scraping sound drifted up from below, like something being dragged across concrete. Sarah's phone had died hours ago, and she'd noticed there were no neighboring houses within shouting distance. The seller, a twitchy man named Marcus Thornfield, had insisted on meeting her here rather than at his office. He'd practically shoved the keys into her hands and sped away before she could ask any questions about utilities or previous tenants. The baby kicked again, and Sarah winced. She couldn't keep living in her car, not this close to her due date, not in November in Maine. But this house felt like a trap, and she'd already walked into it. A door creaked somewhere below, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps on what sounded like wooden stairs. Someone was coming up from the basement. Sarah's muscles tensed as her fight-or-flight response kicked in, but her pregnant body wasn't built for either option. She glanced around quickly, cataloging potential exits and weapons. The front door behind her, a window facing the ocean, another doorway that probably led to the kitchen. A heavy brass candlestick sat on a dust-covered table nearby. The footsteps reached the top of the basement stairs, and Sarah heard the soft whisper of a door opening somewhere deeper in the house. Her throat went dry as she realized the basement access wasn't visible from where she stood, which meant whoever was down there knew this house's layout intimately. "Hello?" The voice was male, cautious but not threatening. "I heard someone come in." Sarah remained silent, weighing her options. The voice sounded young, maybe even frightened, but she'd learned the hard way that voices could lie. "Look, I know this is weird," the voice continued, closer now. "But I've been hiding down there for 3 days. Marcus said nobody would be coming by for weeks." Marcus, the seller. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Was this person in on whatever had happened here, or another victim? Footsteps moved through what she assumed was the kitchen, approaching the living room where she stood. Sarah grabbed the candlestick, its weight reassuring in her hand. A young man appeared in the doorway, maybe 25, with dark circles under his eyes and clothes that looked like he'd been sleeping in them. When he saw her, his face went pale. "Oh God, you're pregnant." He raised his hands, showing they were empty. "Please don't be scared. I didn't do anything. I'm hiding too." Sarah studied his face, looking for tells. His fear seemed genuine, but so had Marcus's helpful demeanor when he'd handed over the keys. "Hiding from what?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The man's eyes darted to the stained walls, then back to her face. "From whoever killed my sister in this house last week." The real estate agent's car disappeared down the coastal road, leaving Sarah alone with her new home and a growing sense of unease. She stood in the overgrown driveway, one hand instinctively moving to her barely visible bump, watching the brake lights fade into the afternoon haze. The house looked different without Margaret Chen's enthusiastic commentary filling the air, smaller somehow, and more isolated than she'd remembered from the rushed viewing 2 weeks ago. The weathered shingles seemed to sag under the weight of salt air and neglect, and several of the upstairs shutters hung at odd angles like broken wings. Sarah pulled out her phone to call her sister, then remembered there was no signal here. That detail had somehow escaped her during the paperwork frenzy. She'd have to drive back to town for groceries anyway, she reasoned, pushing down the flutter of panic in her chest. The front door key stuck in the lock, requiring several attempts before the mechanism finally gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, the air was thick and stale, heavy with the scent of old wood and something else she couldn't quite identify, something sweet and cloying that made her stomach turn. Pregnancy nausea, she told herself firmly. Everything smelled wrong these days. The furnished living room felt like stepping back in time. A faded floral sofa faced a stone fireplace blackened with age, while mismatched end tables held ceramic lamps with pleated shades. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, their faces obscured by dust and dim lighting. Sarah approached the photos, curious about the previous owners. The frames contained images spanning decades: a young couple in formal 1950s wedding attire, children in sailor suits and pinafores, graduation pictures, holiday gatherings, all normal family moments, yet something about them felt wrong. The smiles seemed forced, the poses unnaturally stiff, even accounting for the era's photographic conventions. In several of the later photos, she noticed the same woman appearing across different families, sometimes as a young mother, other times as a grandmother, but always with the same distinctive platinum blonde hair and sharp cheekbones. Sarah picked up one frame for a closer look, squinting at the faded inscription on the back, "Eleanor and Family, Summer 1987. The woman looked exactly the same as she had in a 1963 Christmas photo. Sarah set the frame down quickly, telling herself it was probably just family resemblance across generations. Daughters often looked like their mothers. The poor lighting and old film quality made it hard to distinguish details anyway. She moved through the dining room into the kitchen, where avocado green appliances and checkered linoleum transported her firmly into the 1970s. The refrigerator hummed to life when she plugged it in, though the freezer compartment released an alarming grinding sound. She'd need to stock up on non-perishables until she could afford repairs or replacements. The back door opened onto a screened porch overlooking the beach. Beyond the dunes, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon, waves rolling in steady rhythm against the sand. This was why she'd bought the house, Sarah reminded herself. For this view, this peace, this chance to start over away from David's lawyers and her mother's disapproving phone calls. She climbed the narrow staircase to explore the second floor. 3 bedrooms and a bathroom with original pink tile and a clawfoot tub that had seen better days. The master bedroom faced the ocean, its windows offering the same spectacular view as downstairs. Sarah could already picture a crib in the corner, herself rocking the baby to sleep with the sound of waves as a lullaby. The smallest bedroom appeared to have been a child's room, with pale yellow walls and a few forgotten toys scattered on the floor. A wooden rocking horse missing one stirrup sat in the corner, its painted eyes seeming to follow her movement. Sarah backed out quickly and closed the door. The middle bedroom was completely empty except for a few boxes stacked against one wall. Curiosity overcoming caution, Sarah opened the nearest box to find it filled with more photographs, these loose and unframed. She lifted out a handful, immediately noticing they were older than the ones downstairs, black and white images from what looked like the 1940s and earlier. The same platinum blonde woman appeared in these photos too, standing beside different men, holding different children, but looking absolutely identical to her appearance in the modern color pictures downstairs. Same face, same hair, same age. Sarah's hands began to shake as she shuffled through image after image. The woman appeared in family photos spanning nearly a century, never aging, never changing, always wearing that same enigmatic smile. At the bottom of the box, her fingers closed around something small and metallic. She pulled out a tarnished silver locket, its surface engraved with the initials EM. The clasp opened easily to reveal a tiny photograph inside. The mysterious woman again, but this time Sarah could see the inscription clearly. Eleanor Morrison, 1923. The locket slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers, clattering against the hardwood floor as understanding crashed over her like a cold wave. Morrison, her maiden name. The realtor's business card felt flimsy between Maya's fingers as she stood in the empty living room, afternoon sunlight streaming through salt-stained windows. Patricia Novak, Century 21 Coastal Properties. The woman had been oddly eager to finalize the sale, practically shoving documents under Maya's nose while barely making eye contact. "Strange woman," Maya murmured, tucking the card into her pocket. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. "I know, little one. This place feels weird to me too." She'd spent the morning unpacking boxes, trying to make the house feel like home, but something about the atmosphere resisted her efforts. The walls seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and despite the ocean breeze, the air inside felt stagnant and heavy. Maya wandered into what would become the nursery, her hand trailing along the dated wood paneling. The previous owners had clearly loved their wall coverings. Every room was wrapped in different patterns of faux wood grain that screamed 1970s. She'd planned to tear it all down eventually, but with the baby coming in 3 months, cosmetic renovations would have to wait. A loose panel near the window caught her attention. The corner had separated from the wall, curling slightly outward. Maya pressed it back into place, but it immediately popped out again. Behind it, she glimpsed something that didn't look like standard drywall. Curiosity overrode caution. She worked her fingers behind the panel and pulled gently. It came away easier than expected, revealing a section of older wallpaper underneath, pale yellow with tiny roses. Someone had simply installed the wood paneling right over the original walls. "Lazy contractors," she muttered, but found herself oddly charmed by the vintage pattern. It would actually be perfect for a nursery, much better than the oppressive fake wood. The baby kicked again, more insistently this time, and Maya rubbed her belly. Okay, Mama will get some lunch." She was heading toward the kitchen when her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach clench. David. For a moment, she considered letting it go to voicemail. Their last conversation had ended with him screaming that she was destroying their marriage, that running away wouldn't solve anything, as if staying in Denver while he paraded his graduate student girlfriend around campus was somehow the mature choice. "Hello, David." "Maya." His voice sounded different, strained, almost frightened. "We need to talk. I think we've said everything that needs saying." "No, listen to me. I've been thinking about that house you bought. The address you gave me. I looked it up." Maya frowned, sinking onto the couch. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was worried about you, okay? A pregnant woman buying some random property across the country without even seeing it first. It seemed..." He paused. "Maya, there's something wrong with that place." "Wrong how?" Despite herself, she felt a chill. "I found old newspaper articles from 1987. A family disappeared from that address. Parents and 2 kids. They never found them." Maya's free hand instinctively moved to her belly. "That was over 30 years ago, David. Houses have histories." "But wait, there's more. In 1994, another family. The wife vanished, left behind a husband and baby, and in 2003... Stop! Maya stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the beach. The ocean looked grey and choppy under cloudy skies. Even if that's true, what does it have to do with me? Maya, listen to yourself. Don't you think it's strange that you found this place so easily? That it was so cheap that no one else wanted it? She wanted to argue, but his words echoed her own nagging doubts. The whole purchase had felt too good to be true. The realtor's nervous energy, the seller's eagerness to close quickly, the price that was literally half what comparable properties were going for. I can't just leave, she said finally. I put every penny I had into this place. Then, I'm coming out there. No. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. We're separated, remember? That was your choice when you decided graduate students were more appealing than your pregnant wife. Maya. She hung up and immediately turned off the phone. Her hands were shaking, whether from anger or fear she couldn't tell. David's words had awakened something cold in her chest, a growing certainty that he was right to be worried. The house suddenly felt even more oppressive than before. Maya found herself studying the shadows in corners, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there. Outside, seagulls wheeled and cried, but their calls sounded almost like screaming. She returned to the nursery, drawn back to the exposed wallpaper. Something about those tiny yellow roses seemed familiar, though she couldn't place where she might have seen the pattern before. Maya pulled another section of paneling away, revealing more of the vintage wall covering. That's when she saw it. A small brown stain near the baseboard that looked disturbingly like dried blood. The morning sun streamed through the salt-stained windows as Maya stood in the kitchen, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. Her stomach churned, whether from morning sickness or the events of the previous night she couldn't tell. The mysterious woman's words echoed in her mind. "Oh, shouldn't be here." She'd barely slept, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house settling. Now, in daylight, she tried to convince herself it had been nothing more than a concerned neighbor with poor social skills. But the fear in the woman's eyes had been real, unmistakable. Maya pulled out her phone and searched for the property's history online. The real estate listing had been sparse. Built in 1952, oceanfront, previous owner deceased. Nothing about why it had sat empty for months or why the price had been so impossibly low. A knock at the front door made her jump, coffee sloshing over the rim of her mug. Through the peephole she saw a man in his 60s, wearing a faded baseball cap and holding a toolbox. "Mrs. Chen? I'm Bill Hendricks, the handyman. Mrs. Patterson from next door said you might need some work done." Maya opened the door cautiously. Bill had kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of decades of honest work. Mrs. Patterson must be the woman from last night, though this man's demeanor was entirely different, warm where hers had been cold. "I didn't ask for a handyman," Maya said. "Well, Mrs. Patterson's lived here 40 years. When she says a house needs attention, it usually does." He gestured toward the peeling paint around the doorframe. "Mind if I take a look around? No charge for an estimate." Something about his steady presence made Maya's shoulders relax slightly. She needed allies here, not more mysteries. "I suppose that would be helpful." Bill moved through the house with practiced efficiency, noting loose floorboards, testing faucets, examining window frames. In the master bedroom, he paused at the wall where Maya had heard the scratching. "This wall's been patched," he said, running his fingers along what Maya had thought was just discolored paint. "Recent work, too, maybe 6 months ago." "Patched? From what?" "Hard to say without opening it up. Could be water damage, could be—" He trailed off, his expression shifting slightly. "Could be what?" Bill cleared his throat. "Well, sometimes old houses have pest problems. Mice, rats. They can do a number on drywall." But his tone suggested he was thinking of something else entirely. Maya felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "Mr. Hendricks, do you know what happened to the previous owner?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Bill set down his toolbox and faced her directly. "Look, Mrs. Chen, I've been working on houses in this neighborhood for 30 years. The Whitmore place, that's what folks still call this house. It's had its troubles. What kind of troubles? Eleanor Whitmore lived here alone for decades after her husband passed. Nice lady, kept to herself mostly. But toward the end, he shook his head. Neighbors started hearing things, shouting in the middle of the night like she was arguing with someone. But she lived alone. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her belly. How did she die? Found her at the bottom of the stairs. Coroner said it was an accident. She was 83, could have just fallen. But, she'd called the police 3 times in the weeks before. Said someone was in her walls, said they were trying to get out. Bill's voice dropped lower. Officers came each time, never found anything. Figured it was dementia. The scratching sound from the night before suddenly seemed much more sinister. Maya felt dizzy, gripping the doorframe for support. You okay? You've gone pale. I heard something in the walls last night, she admitted. Scratching. Bill's expression darkened. He moved back to the patched section of wall and knocked on it with his knuckles. The sound was hollow, different from the solid thunks elsewhere. Mrs. Chen, I think you should consider staying somewhere else tonight while I investigate this properly. I can't afford anywhere else. That's why I bought this place. Understanding flickered in his eyes. You got it for a steal, didn't you? Price too good to be true? Maya nodded, feeling foolish. Thought so. Bill picked up his toolbox. I'm going to come back this afternoon with some equipment. Don't go near that wall until then, understand? As he reached the front door, Maya called after him. Mr. Hendricks, what do you really think is behind that wall? He paused, his hand on the doorknob. Honestly? I hope it's just mice. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Maya alone with the growing certainty that her bargain house had come with a price she was only beginning to understand. The real estate office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Maya shifted uncomfortably in the cracked vinyl chair, her hand instinctively moving to her growing belly as she waited for Harold Pembroke to finish shuffling through his filing cabinets. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows across the wood-paneled walls lined with faded property listings. Ah, here we are, Harold muttered, pulling out a manila folder thick with yellow documents. He was older than she'd expected from their phone conversation, probably in his 70s, with liver spots dotting his hands and wire-rimmed glasses that had seen better decades. The Whitmore property. Haven't had anyone ask about that place in years. Maya leaned forward, eager for answers about the house's history. You mentioned there were previous owners before the Whitmores? Harold's expression shifted, becoming guarded. He set the folder down but didn't open it immediately. Well, yes, but property records only go back so far in our system. The Whitmores owned it for about 15 years before they passed. Lovely couple, kept to themselves mostly. How did they die? The question slipped out before Maya could stop herself. Car accident, Harold replied quickly, too quickly. His fingers drummed against the desk. Tragic thing. They were driving back from the mainland during a storm. Road was slick. Maya studied his face, noting how his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Was there anyone before the Whitmores? Records get fuzzy going back that far, he said, finally opening the folder. Let's see. There was a family named Crane who owned it in the 60s and 70s, and before that... He paused, squinting at a document. Looks like it was built by someone named Blackwood in 1954. The name hit Maya like a physical blow. Blackwood, the same name she'd found carved in the basement wall. Her heart began racing, but she forced her voice to remain steady. Blackwood? Do you know anything about that family? Harold's discomfort was palpable now. He closed the folder abruptly and removed his glasses, cleaning them with unnecessary precision. Like I said, records from that era are incomplete. People didn't keep track of things the way they do now, but surely there must be something. Birth certificates, death certificates, newspaper articles. Miss Chen. Harold's voice carried a warning edge. You bought that house for a good price. Sometimes it's better to focus on the future rather than digging around in the past. Old houses have old stories, and not all of them are pleasant. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of stories? Harold stood up, clearly signaling the end of their conversation. Nothing concrete, just local talk. You know how small communities can be. People like their gossip. But Maya wasn't ready to give up. Mr. Pembroke, I found something in the house, in the basement. There's a name carved into the wall, Blackwood. And there are marks, like someone was trying to keep track of days. It looks like someone might have been trapped down there. The color drained from Harold's face. He sat back down heavily, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for a glass of water on his desk. You shouldn't be poking around in that basement. So you do know something? A long silence stretched between them. Outside, Maya could hear the distant cry of seagulls and the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Finally, Harold spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. There were rumors, back in the 50s and 60s, about the Blackwood family. He glanced toward the window as if checking to make sure they weren't being overheard. Daniel Blackwood built that house after the war. He lived there with his wife and young daughter, but people started talking when the wife and child disappeared. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Disappeared? Officially, they moved away. That's what Daniel claimed. Said his wife took the girl back to her family on the mainland. But, Harold shook his head. Small town, you understand. People notice things. No one ever saw them leave. No moving truck, no taxi to the ferry. One day they were there, the next they were gone. What happened to Daniel? He lived in that house alone for another year or so. Then one winter, he just vanished too. House sat empty until the bank finally sold it to the Crane family in the early 60s. Maya felt sick. The scratches in the basement wall, the sense of trapped desperation she'd felt down there. It was starting to make terrible sense. Did anyone ever investigate? The police? Harold laughed bitterly. This was 1955. Missing women and children weren't exactly high priority, especially when their husband claimed they'd left voluntarily. And Daniel Blackwood was a respected man in the community. War veteran, regular churchgoer. He paused, studying Maya's pale face. Look, maybe I shouldn't have told you all this. Like I said, it's just old rumors. Could be nothing to it. But Maya knew better. The house had been trying to tell her its secrets from the moment she'd walked through the door. The morning light filtering through the salt-stained windows did nothing to diminish the weight of what Maya had discovered. She sat at the kitchen table, the birth certificate spread before her like evidence at a crime scene, her coffee growing cold as she stared at the faded ink that spelled out her mother's name. Elena Vasquez, born in this house. The same house her mother had sworn she'd never seen before in her life. Maya's hands trembled as she reached for her phone, then hesitated. What would she say? How do you confront someone about a lie that's lasted 30 years? The baby shifted inside her, a gentle reminder that she was carrying not just new life, but potentially inherited secrets. She needed more answers before making that call. The basement beckoned like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole, but Maya forced herself to descend the creaking stairs again. In daylight, what little penetrated the grimy windows, the space felt less ominous but more revealing. She'd been so focused on the documents last night that she'd barely examined the rest of the room. The old steamer trunk sat in the corner, its brass corners green with age. Maya knelt beside it, her pregnant belly making the position awkward, and lifted the heavy lid. The hinges protested with a metallic shriek that seemed to echo through the house's bones. Inside, layers of history unfolded like sediment in archaeological dig. Photographs, dozens of them, some so old they were printed on thick cardboard with scalloped edges. Maya lifted the first stack with careful fingers. Her breath caught. There was her mother, but not as Maya had ever known her. This Elena was young, maybe 16, with wild dark hair and a defiant smile. She stood on the beach behind the house, her arm around a boy Maya didn't recognize. Behind them, the house looked different, well-maintained, painted white with blue shutters, flowers blooming in window boxes. Maya flipped through more photos, her mother at various ages, always in or around this house, playing in the surf as a child, sitting on the front porch as a teenager, standing in this very basement, holding what looked like a baby. The photograph slipped from Maya's fingers as recognition hit her like a physical blow. The baby in Elena's arms had Maya's eyes, Maya's distinctive cleft chin. But the photo was dated 1985, 7 years before Maya's official birth date. Her vision blurred as she scrambled for more photos, searching for an explanation that would make sense. Instead, she found only more questions. Pictures of her mother pregnant, pictures of her holding a baby, pictures of her looking devastated and hollow-eyed in what was clearly this same basement. At the bottom of the trunk, wrapped in a yellowed towel, Maya found a leather journal. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, young and looping, chronicling a story Maya had never heard. April 15th, 1985. She's beautiful and perfect, and I can't keep her. Papa says the family would never understand, that it would destroy everything we've worked for since coming to America. The father's family has money, influence. They've made it clear what will happen if word gets out. Maya's hands shook so violently she could barely hold the journal. She forced herself to keep reading. Today, April 30th, 1985. Today I gave my daughter to the people who will give her the life I can't. They promise she'll be loved, educated, want for nothing. They promise I can see her again someday when things are different. I know they're lying about that last part, but what choice do I have? The entries continued, chronicling Elena's heartbreak, her parents' decision to leave town, to start over somewhere else. The last entry was dated 7 years later. They called 1992. They called today. Her adoptive mother died in a car accident. They want to give Maya back to me, but as far as the world knows, I never had a daughter, so I'll be her mother for the first time, and she'll never know she's coming home. Maya dropped the journal as if it had caught fire. The baby inside her seemed to respond to her shock, pressing against her ribs with uncomfortable force. She struggled to breathe, to process what she'd just learned. She was adopted. The woman she'd called mother her entire life was actually her birth mother, forced to give her up only to take her back years later. Everything she'd thought she knew about her origins was a carefully constructed lie. But why? And why had her mother been so adamant about never seeing this house when it was clearly where Maya had been born, where Elena herself had grown up? A sound from upstairs made Maya freeze, the distinct creak of footsteps across the kitchen floor, heavy, deliberate steps that definitely weren't hers. Someone was in the house. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as she listened, trying to convince herself it was just the old house settling. But then she heard it again, followed by the unmistakable sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Someone was searching for something, and they were right above her head. The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at the woman who could have been her twin. The same dark hair, the same angular cheekbones, even the same small scar above the left eyebrow that Sarah had gotten falling off her bike at age 7. But this woman stood in front of the beach house decades ago, her belly rounded with pregnancy, wearing a dress Sarah had seen in her own mother's old photo albums. "This can't be right," she whispered to the empty room, but the evidence was undeniable. The timestamp on the back read 1987, the year Sarah was born. Her phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus, "Please call me back, we need to talk." She ignored it, her mind racing. If this woman was her mother, then everything Sarah knew about her birth, her family, her entire life was a lie. Her parents had always told her she was born in Chicago, that they'd never lived anywhere else. But here was proof that her mother had been at this very house, pregnant, just before Sarah's birth. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Sarah froze, listening. The house had been settling all day, but this sound was different, deliberate, like footsteps. She grabbed the flashlight and climbed the stairs slowly, avoiding the spots she'd learned would groan under her weight. The upstairs hallway stretched before her, 4 doors leading to bedrooms and a bathroom, All were closed except one at the far end. The master bedroom door stood slightly ajar, though she was certain she'd closed it earlier. Heart hammering, Sarah pushed it open. The room was empty, but the closet door was now open, revealing the dark space beyond. She approached cautiously, flashlight beam dancing across the walls. Inside the closet, the back panel hung loose. Behind it, a small space had been carved out of the wall. More photographs scattered the floor, along with what looked like medical records and a leather journal. Sarah gathered everything, her hands shaking as she recognized her mother's handwriting on the journal's cover. Margaret Chen, 1987. She fled downstairs and spread the documents across the kitchen table. The medical records were from a clinic in the next town over. Prenatal appointments for Margaret Chen, due date in September 1987. But at the bottom of one report, a note that made Sarah's blood run cold, patient expressing concerns about safety. Recommend immediate relocation. Father's family history of violence documented. The journal entries painted a picture of escalating terror. June 15th, 1987. He found us again. Richard thinks we can hide here, but I don't know how long we'll be safe. The baby is due soon, and I'm so scared. July 2nd, 1987. Strange things happening in the house. Doors opening, sounds at night. Richard says it's just the old structure, but I think someone's been watching us. Found footprints in the sand leading right to our back door. July 20th, 1987. Can't take it anymore. Richard's brother came by today asking questions. We have to leave tonight. If something happens to us, I'm hiding these papers. Maybe someday our daughter will understand why we had to disappear. Sarah's vision blurred. Her father's name was David, not Richard, and she'd been born Sarah Walsh, not Sarah Chen, but the dates aligned perfectly with her birthday. A sound from the kitchen made her look up. The back door was open, salt air whipping the curtains. She was certain she'd locked it. "Hello?" she called out, grabbing a knife from the counter. "Is someone there?" Silence answered her, but she could feel eyes watching from the darkness beyond the door. She slammed it shut and turned the deadbolt, then pulled out her phone to call Marcus. Before she could dial, she noticed a new text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like them." The lights went out. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as she backed against the wall, knife raised. The house groaned around her, but underneath the natural sounds, she heard something else. Footsteps circling the house, slow, methodical. She crept to the front window and peered through the curtain. A figure stood at the edge of the driveway, barely visible in the moonlight, too far away to make out features, but close enough to see they were watching the house. Sarah's phone buzzed with another message. "Your parents thought they could hide the truth. Look how that worked out for them." Terror flooded her system as the implications hit her. Her parents hadn't died in a car accident when she was 10. They'd been found. And now somehow she'd led their killers right back to where it all started. The figure at the end of the driveway began walking toward the house. Sarah grabbed the journal and photographs, stuffed them into her bag, and ran for the stairs. She had to find another way out, had to get to her car before they reached the house. But as she climbed toward the second floor, she heard the distinctive sound of a key turning in the front door lock. They weren't just watching anymore, they were coming inside. The morning light filtering through the salt-stained windows revealed what Maya had missed in her frantic search the night before. Scattered across the living room floor were dozens of photographs, some face down, others crumpled where she'd dropped them in her haste to escape whatever had been scratching inside the walls. Her hands trembled as she gathered them, studying each image with growing unease. The same woman appeared in every photograph, dark hair, warm brown eyes, a smile that seemed hauntingly familiar. But it was the progression of images that made Maya's blood run cold. The woman grew noticeably pregnant in the later photos, her belly round and full, hands protectively cradling the life within. In the final photograph, the woman stood on the very porch where Maya now lived, holding a newborn baby. The infant's face was turned away from the camera, but something about the woman's expression, proud, fierce, protective, made Maya's chest tighten with recognition. She flipped the photo over. Written in faded blue ink, Elena Vasquez and daughter, 1997. Maya's maiden name was Vasquez. Her mother had always claimed Maya was born in a hospital in Phoenix, but she'd never seen her birth certificate. Every time she'd asked, her mother had deflected, changed the subject, or suddenly remembered an urgent errand. The baby in Maya's womb gave a sharp kick, as if responding to her racing pulse. She pressed her hand to her belly, trying to calm herself. Coincidences happened. Vasquez wasn't an uncommon name. The resemblance between her and this Elena could be purely accidental. But as she stared at the photograph, studying Elena's features more closely, the similarities became impossible to ignore. The shape of her nose, the curve of her lips, even the way she tilted her head slightly to the left. It was like looking into a mirror that reflected back 25 years. A soft scratching sound made her freeze. It was coming from behind the kitchen wall again, but this time it seemed almost rhythmic, like a pattern, like communication. Maya approached the wall cautiously, pressing her ear against the peeling paint. The scratching stopped immediately, as if whatever was inside knew she was listening. Then, after a long moment, it resumed. 3 short scratches, 3 long ones, 3 short again. SOS. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone was trapped inside the walls. Someone who knew Morse code. "Hello?" she called softly, feeling foolish but desperate. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped completely. The silence stretched so long that Maya began to wonder if she'd imagined the pattern. Then, barely audible, came a sound that made her knees buckle, a baby's cry. Muffled, distant, but unmistakably an infant in distress. The sound seemed to come from deep within the wall, impossible as that seemed. Maya pressed both hands against the surface, feeling for any sign of a hidden door or panel. Her fingers found something, a section of wall that felt different from the rest, hollow. She pushed against it experimentally, and a small section of the baseboard shifted inward with a soft click. Behind it was a narrow opening, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of dust and something else, something sweet and cloying that made her stomach turn. The baby's crying had stopped, but now she could hear something else, whispered words, too faint to make out, in what sounded like Spanish. A woman's voice, urgent and pleading. Maya knew she should call the police, should run, should do anything except crawl into a mysterious hole in the wall of a house that was clearly hiding terrible secrets. But the voice was so desperate, so familiar somehow, that she found herself on her hands and knees, peering into the darkness. "I'm here," she whispered into the opening. "I'm going to help." The whispering stopped abruptly. Then, clear as day, came a voice that made Maya's world tilt on its axis. "Mija? Is that you? Have you finally come home?" The word hit her like a physical blow. Mija, my daughter. It was what her mother had called her as a child, before their relationship had grown cold and distant. But this wasn't her mother's voice. This was someone else, someone who sounded exactly like the woman Maya had always imagined her real mother might be. "Who are you?" Maya managed to whisper. "I'm Elena," came the reply, soft and broken. "I've been waiting for you, Maya. I've been waiting for so long." Maya's heart stopped. Elena knew her name. The woman in the photographs, the woman who looked exactly like her, was somehow alive inside the walls of this house, and she knew Maya's name. "That's impossible," Maya breathed. A laugh echoed from the darkness, sad, hollow, and infinitely weary. "Nothing is impossible in this house, Mija. Nothing except leaving. I learned that 25 years ago, when they took you from me and told me you were dead." The morning sun filtered through the salt-stained windows as Maya sat at the kitchen table. The pregnancy test results and birth certificate spread before her like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to complete. Her coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Every time she looked at Sarah Chen's name on the medical documents, her stomach churned with something that went beyond morning sickness. A sharp knock at the front door made her jump, sending the papers scattering. Through the peephole, she saw a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, wearing a cardigan despite the warming day. Maya had never seen her before, but something about her posture suggested she belonged here more than Maya did. "Can I help you?" Maya asked through the door. "I'm Eleanor Whitman. I lived next door for 40 years before I moved to the assisted living facility." The woman's voice carried the weight of authority. "I need to speak with you about this house." Maya's hand instinctively went to her belly as she unlocked the door. Eleanor's sharp blue eyes immediately took in Maya's condition, and her expression softened slightly. "You're pregnant," Eleanor observed, stepping inside without invitation. "How far along?" 22 weeks. Maya watched as Eleanor surveyed the living room, her gaze lingering on the spot where Maya had discovered the loose floorboard. "Did you know the previous owners?" Eleanor's laugh was bitter. "Know them? I watched 3 families destroy themselves in this house over the decades. The Chens were just the most recent." She moved toward the kitchen, and Maya followed, her heart racing. "Sarah Chen was a lovely girl. Reminded me of my own daughter. What happened to her?" "Same thing that happened to Margaret Willis in the 70s and Anna Kowalski in the 90s. Eleanor picked up the birth certificate from the table, studying it with knowing eyes. "They came here desperate, thinking they'd found salvation, a beautiful house by the ocean, priced too good to be true, and it was." Maya felt the room spinning slightly. "What do you mean?" Eleanor set the certificate down carefully. "This house has been sold and resold by the same entity for 50 years. Different names on the paperwork, but always the same pattern. Young women, usually pregnant or trying to get pregnant, always in desperate circumstances." She looked directly at Maya. "Women who wouldn't be missed right away if something happened to them. That's impossible. I researched the property history." "You researched what they wanted you to find." Eleanor moved to the window overlooking the beach. "Tell me, have you experienced anything unusual since you moved in? Strange sounds, the feeling of being watched?" Maya's mouth went dry. The whispers in the walls, the moving shadows, the constant sensation that the house was breathing around her. "How do you know about that?" "Because I watched it happen before. Sarah Chen came to me 3 months after she moved in, terrified and paranoid. She'd found things hidden in the house, just like you have. She was convinced someone was monitoring her pregnancy." Eleanor turned back to Maya, her expression grave. She wasn't paranoid. She was right. The baby kicked hard against Maya's ribs, as if responding to the tension in the room. "What happened to her baby?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Eleanor pulled out a worn leather journal from her purse. "I've been keeping records for years, trying to piece it together. The women always disappeared during their 3rd trimester. Sometimes there are signs of struggle, sometimes they just vanish, but the house always goes back on the market within months, ready for the next desperate soul." Maya grabbed the edge of the table for support. "You think someone is, what, harvesting babies?" "I think someone has been running a very sophisticated operation for decades, using this house as their base. The location is perfect, isolated enough for privacy, but respectable enough not to attract suspicion. And the women they target," Eleanor's voice trailed off as she studied Maya's face. "They choose carefully. Women with few family connections, financial problems, limited support systems." The description hit Maya like a physical blow. It was exactly her situation. Alone, desperate, with no one who would immediately notice if she disappeared. "Why are you telling me this? Why didn't you go to the police years ago?" "I tried. Multiple times, but the evidence always disappeared. Witnesses recanted their statements, and I was dismissed as a neighborhood busybody with an overactive imagination." Eleanor closed her journal with a snap. "But you're different. You've found physical evidence, and you're smart enough to recognize the pattern. We might finally have a chance to stop this." Maya's hands shook as she gathered the scattered papers. What do I need to do? First, we need to find out who's really behind the property sales. And second, Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper, we need to figure out how much time you have before they make their move. Based on the pattern, it won't be long. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Maya wondered if she was already too late to escape. The storm had passed, leaving the beach house eerily quiet, except for the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. Maya sat on the kitchen floor, her back against the cabinet, staring at the collection of evidence spread before her like pieces of a nightmare puzzle. The photographs, the journal entries, the birth certificate with her mother's maiden name, everything pointed to a truth she wasn't sure she could handle. Her phone buzzed. A text from David, flight delayed. Won't be there until tomorrow evening. Everything okay? She started to type a response, then deleted it. How could she explain that everything she thought she knew about her family was unraveling, that the house they'd bought for a fresh start might be the place where her grandmother had died under mysterious circumstances? Maya pushed herself up from the floor, her hand instinctively moving to her belly where the baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her distress. She needed to think clearly, to piece together what she'd learned. Her grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, had lived in this house. The journal suggested she'd been hiding something, possibly protecting someone. But from what? And why had her mother never mentioned any of this? The floorboard in the bedroom creaked overhead, and Maya froze. She was alone in the house. The sound came again, deliberate, measured footsteps. Her heart hammering, Maya grabbed the largest kitchen knife from the block and crept toward the stairs. Each step seemed to echo through the house despite her efforts to move quietly. The footsteps had stopped, but she could sense a presence above. "Hello?" she called out, her voice shakier than she'd intended. "Is someone there?" Silence. Maya climbed the stairs, knife held in front of her, every instinct screaming at her to run. But where could she go? The nearest neighbor was half a mile away, and in her condition she couldn't move fast enough to escape if someone meant her harm. The bedroom door was open. She peered inside, scanning the shadows cast by the afternoon sun filtering through the curtains. The room appeared empty, but the loose floorboard where she'd found the documents was slightly displaced, as if someone had been examining it. A cool breeze brushed against her neck, and she spun around to find the window open. A window she was certain had been closed when she'd left the room earlier. Her hands trembling, she approached it and looked out at the beach below. No one in sight. Maya was about to close the window when she noticed something carved into the wooden frame. Letters so faint they were barely visible. She ran her fingers over them. E.W., the truth is buried with the tide. Eleanor Whitmore. Her grandmother had left another message. The sound of a car door slamming outside sent Maya rushing to the front window. A black sedan sat in her driveway, and a tall man in a dark coat was walking toward the house. She didn't recognize him, but something about his purposeful stride made her blood run cold. The doorbell rang once, then again, more insistently. Maya crept down the stairs, still clutching the knife. Through the peephole she could see the man clearly, middle-aged, with sharp features and cold grey eyes. He looked like he belonged in a funeral home or a courtroom. "Mrs. Chen," his voice carried through the door. "My name is Robert Hawthorne. I represent certain interested parties regarding this property. We need to talk." Maya pressed herself against the wall beside the door. She hadn't told anyone but David about buying the house. How did this man know where to find her? "I know you're inside, Mrs. Chen, and I know you've found things that don't belong to you, things that could cause considerable trouble if misunderstood." The handle rattled as he tested the door. Maya had locked it, but the old mechanism didn't inspire confidence. "Your grandmother was a very clever woman," Hawthorne continued, his tone conversational but threatening. "She thought she could outsmart people far more powerful than herself. It didn't end well for her." Maya's breath caught. He was admitting that something had happened to Eleanor, that her death hadn't been natural. "The documents you found tell only part of the story, Mrs. Chen, and frankly, it's the part that could get you killed if you're not careful. I'm here to offer you a way out." A generous payment for the house, enough to set you up somewhere far from here, enough to give your child a safe future. The baby kicked hard as if protesting the threat. Maya closed her eyes, trying to think. This man knew about her grandmother, about the documents, about her pregnancy. He'd been watching her, possibly from the beginning. "I'll give you time to consider," Hawthorne called out, "but not much. Some secrets are worth killing for, Mrs. Chen, and some people will do anything to keep them buried." His footsteps retreated, and moments later the car engine started. Maya waited until the sound faded completely before moving to the window to confirm he was gone. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone. She needed help, but who could she trust? The police seemed like the obvious choice, but what if Hawthorne had connections there too? Sarah's hands trembled as she held the yellowed birth certificate, her grandmother's maiden name staring back at her in faded ink. The connection to this house wasn't coincidence, it was blood. Margaret Holloway had lived here, had perhaps died here, and somehow that truth had been buried along with whatever horrors these walls contained. The basement felt smaller now, the shadows pressing closer as she pieced together the fragments of her family's hidden past. She thought of her grandmother's stories about growing up poor near the coast, stories that had always seemed deliberately vague. Now she understood why. A sound from upstairs made her freeze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving across the living room floor. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had locked the front door, hadn't she? The footsteps paused directly above her head, and she could hear the faint creak of floorboards settling under someone's weight. She clutched the documents to her chest and moved toward the basement stairs, her bare feet silent on the concrete. Each step felt like an eternity as she climbed toward the kitchen door, straining to hear any movement above. The footsteps had stopped. Sarah pressed her ear against the basement door, holding her breath. Nothing. Maybe she had imagined it. The old house was full of settling sounds, and her nerves were frayed to breaking point. She turned the handle slowly and eased the door open just enough to peer through the crack. The kitchen appeared empty, late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows she had left open to air out the musty smell. "Hello?" she called softly, feeling foolish but needing to be sure. Silence answered her. Sarah stepped into the kitchen, documents still clutched against her, and surveyed the living room beyond. Everything looked exactly as she had left it. The real estate papers scattered on the coffee table, her overnight bag by the couch, the front door still securely locked with the chain engaged. She was losing her mind. The stress, the pregnancy hormones, the shock of discovering this connection to her family, it was all taking its toll. She set the documents on the kitchen counter and filled a glass with water from the tap, her hands still shaking slightly. As she drank, she stared out the window at the beach beyond, trying to center herself. The waves rolled endlessly toward shore, indifferent to her turmoil. That's when she saw him. A man stood at the edge of her property line, partially obscured by the tall grass that separated her yard from the neighboring lot. He was watching the house, and when their eyes met through the window, he didn't look away. Sarah's grip tightened on the glass. The man appeared to be in his 60s, wearing a dark jacket despite the warm weather. His face was gaunt, weathered, with sharp features that seemed vaguely familiar. She moved away from the window, her heart racing again. When she risked another glance, he was gone. The documents on the counter seemed to mock her now. Every answer she found only led to more questions, and now she wasn't even safe in her own home, if this place could even be called that anymore. Sarah grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Detective Morrison's number. He had seemed genuinely concerned about her safety, and right now she needed someone in authority to know where she was. The call went straight to voicemail. "Detective Morrison, this is Sarah Chen. I'm at the beach house and I've found something important about my family's connection to this place. There are documents, birth certificates. I think my grandmother lived here. And someone was just watching the house. I'm scared and I don't know who else to call. Please call me back." She hung up and immediately dialed James, but his phone also went to voicemail. Of course, he was probably in surgery. She left a similar message, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. The baby kicked. a sharp jab that reminded her she wasn't just responsible for her own safety anymore. She should leave, pack up the documents, get in her car, and drive back to the city where there were people and lights and locked doors that actually meant something. But as she looked at the papers scattered across the counter, she knew she couldn't walk away. Not when she was this close to understanding what had really happened here. What had happened to Margaret Holloway, what it all meant for her family. The sun was getting lower, painting the kitchen in deep golden hues that would soon give way to twilight. Sarah made a decision. She would stay long enough to go through everything she had found, to piece together as much of the story as possible, but she would be ready to leave at the first sign of real danger. She gathered all the documents and moved to the living room, positioning herself on the couch where she could see both the front door and the windows. Then she began to read, searching for the truth that had been hidden in these walls for decades. The basement felt like a tomb as Sarah descended the creaking stairs, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The musty smell of decay and something else, something metallic, grew stronger with each step. Behind her, Marcus's breathing was labored, and she could hear him favoring his injured leg. "Sarah, we should wait for the police," he whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. They both knew waiting wasn't an option anymore. Not after what they'd found in the walls upstairs. The beam of her flashlight swept across the basement floor, revealing scattered tools, paint cans, and construction debris. But it was the far corner that made her blood run cold. A section of the concrete floor had been recently disturbed. The cement was a different shade, clearly newer than the rest. "Oh God," she breathed, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing her distress. Marcus limped over to examine the floor more closely. This was poured maybe 6 months ago. Look at the edges. They didn't even try to blend it properly. Sarah's mind raced back to the real estate agent's words about the previous owner doing some renovations before the sale. Her hands trembled as she aimed the light around the rest of the basement, looking for anything else that seemed out of place. That's when she saw it. A wooden crate pushed against the wall, partially hidden behind an old tarp. Unlike everything else down here, it looked deliberately placed, not just stored. She approached it slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Sarah, don't—" She was already lifting the tarp. Inside the crate were dozens of photographs, all black and white, all depicting the same scene from different angles. A woman lying motionless on what looked like a beach at night. Even in the grainy photos, Sarah could make out the distinctive rock formations she recognized from her own backyard. She picked up one of the photos with shaking fingers. Written on the back in faded ink was a date, July 15th, 1987, and a name that made her knees buckle, Elena Martinez. Her grandmother's name. Her grandmother who had supposedly died in a car accident when Sarah's mother was just a teenager. Her grandmother whose body was never found because the car had gone into the river. Marcus was reading over her shoulder now. "Sarah, this doesn't make sense. Why would someone have photos of your grandmother's death, and why here?" She flipped through more photos, each one more disturbing than the last. They weren't accident photos. They were methodical, documentary, like someone was recording what they'd done. At the bottom of the crate, her fingers found something else. A leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it with trembling hands, and her grandfather's handwriting stared back at her from the first page. "Anyone finds this, I want them to know I never meant for it to go this far. Elena was going to leave me. She found out about the money I'd been taking from the construction company, about the house I'd bought here to hide it. She threatened to go to the police." Sarah's vision blurred as she read on, each word a nail in the coffin of everything she thought she knew about her family. "I didn't plan to hurt her. We were arguing on the beach behind the house and she fell, hit her head on the rocks. But when I saw her lying there, I realized this was my chance. Everyone already thought she was unstable after losing the baby last year. I called in the car accident, left her car by the river bridge, and buried her here." The journal slipped from Sarah's nerveless fingers. "He killed her," she whispered. My grandfather killed my grandmother and let everyone think she abandoned them. Marcus picked up the journal, scanning the remaining entries. Sarah, there's more. He writes about someone else finding out, someone who tried to blackmail him. She forced herself to look at the next page, where her grandfather's neat handwriting had become increasingly erratic. Richard Kellerman knows. That private investigator Elena hired before she died. He's been watching the house, asking questions. He wants money to keep quiet, but I can't trust him. I won't let him destroy what I've built for my family. The basement floor needs repair anyway. The full horror of what they'd stumbled into hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her grandfather hadn't just killed her grandmother. He'd killed again to cover it up, and now she was living in the house where it had all happened, pregnant with a baby who would carry this legacy in their blood. From somewhere above them came the sound of a door slamming. Sarah and Marcus froze, listening as heavy footsteps crossed the floor overhead. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to know exactly where they were. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, the screen casting an eerie glow in the darkness, and found your car in the driveway. Time to finish what your grandfather started. The footsteps stopped directly above them, and dust rained down from the ceiling as someone began moving furniture around, the scraping sound echoing through the basement like fingernails on a coffin. They were trapped. The photograph trembled in Maya's hands as she stared at her own face, looking back at her. Except it wasn't her face. The woman in the yellowed picture had the same dark eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same stubborn chin that Maya recognized from every mirror she'd ever looked into. But this woman wore clothes from decades past, her hair styled in victory rolls, standing beside a man in a naval uniform outside the very house Maya now owned. "That's impossible," she whispered, sinking onto the dusty floor of the hidden room behind the kitchen wall. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. The wooden box she'd discovered contained dozens of photographs, all featuring the same woman, her doppelganger, throughout different stages of life. In some, the woman was younger, laughing on the beach. In others, older, more somber, always in front of the house. The final photographs showed her visibly pregnant, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, the other clutching the arm of a man whose face had been deliberately scratched out in every single image. Maya's phone buzzed. Detective Morrison's name flashed on the screen. "Maya, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I'm at the house." "Sarah, I found something. Her voice caught. "I need you to come here. Now, on my way." Maya carefully spread the photographs across the floor, arranging them chronologically. The resemblance was so striking it made her dizzy. In the corner of the box, she found a birth certificate dated 1943. Margaret Rose Henley, born in the same hospital where Maya had been born 50 years later. A marriage certificate was underneath. Margaret Rose Henley to Captain James Henley, 1941. Maya's maiden name was Henley. Her father had always claimed they had no family, that it was just the two of them after her mother died. But here was proof of relatives he'd never mentioned. The sound of car tires on gravel announced Sarah's arrival. Maya heard the front door slam, footsteps crossing the living room. "Maya, where are you?" "Back here, behind the kitchen. There's a hidden panel." Sarah squeezed through the narrow opening, her flashlight beam sweeping across the small room. "Jesus, what is this place? Look at these." Maya handed her the photographs. Sarah's flashlight illuminated the images, and Maya watched her partner's face change from confusion to shock. "Maya, this woman, she looks exactly like you." Margaret Rose Henley. According to these documents, she lived here in the 1940s. "Sarah, Henley was my maiden name. You think she's related to you?" "I think she's my grandmother. The grandmother my father swore never existed." Maya struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making the movement awkward. "But there's more." She showed Sarah the marriage certificate, then pulled out the final item from the box, a leather journal tied with a faded ribbon. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with Margaret's careful handwriting. "March 15th, 1943. Maya read aloud. James came home different from the war. There's something wrong with him, something dark. The things he says in his sleep, the names he calls out, they aren't the names of fallen soldiers. They're the names of women, local women who've gone missing. Sarah leaned closer, her expression grim. Keep reading. March 22nd. I found the room. God help me, I found what he's been hiding. The jewelry, the clothes, the photographs, all those poor girls. And now I'm trapped here, carrying his child, knowing what he's done. Maya's hands shook as she turned the page. April 3rd. I can't let him hurt anyone else. I've hidden the evidence where he'll never find it. If something happens to me, if I don't survive what's coming, maybe someday someone will find the truth. The bones are in the foundation. He made me watch as he buried them in the cement when they expanded the basement. 3 women, 3 beautiful girls who trusted him. The journal entries stopped abruptly after that date. Maya flipped through the remaining pages, all blank. Margaret was my grandmother, Maya said, the pieces clicking into place. She discovered her husband was a serial killer. And somehow, some way, my father knew about this place, knew about this family history, and never told me. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the photographs. Maya, there's something else. Something I came here to tell you. She hesitated. We got the DNA results back from the bones we found. We also ran them through missing persons databases. And the victims were all young women, all reported missing between 1941 and 1943. But that's not all. Sarah met her eyes. We found evidence of a 4th victim. Recent, very recent. What do you mean recent? I mean within the last month. The cement in one section of the basement foundation has been disturbed, re-poured. Maya, someone's been continuing James Henley's work. Someone who knows about this house, about its history. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Maya felt a sharp pain shoot through her abdomen. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. Someone's been watching me, she whispered. The basement felt different now, charged with a malevolent energy that made Sarah's skin crawl. The hidden room behind the false wall gaped open like a wound, revealing secrets that had festered in darkness for decades. She clutched the leather journal to her chest, her mother's handwriting still fresh in her mind, each word a revelation that shattered everything she thought she knew. Marcus descended the stairs slowly, his footsteps deliberate and measured. In the dim light filtering down from above, his face looked different, harder, more angular. The man who had been helping her, protecting her, suddenly seemed like a stranger. You weren't supposed to find that room, he said, his voice devoid of the warmth she'd grown accustomed to, at least not yet. Sarah backed deeper into the hidden chamber, her hand instinctively moving to protect her belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her terror. You knew about this place. You knew about my mother. Marcus stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the walls covered in photographs and documents. I knew about a lot of things, Sarah, more than I wanted to know. The truth hit her like a physical blow. You're not here by accident. The real estate agent, the convenient timing, none of it was coincidence. Your mother was very thorough in her preparations, Marcus said, moving closer. She left detailed instructions about what should happen if you ever came looking for answers. I was supposed to guide you, help you understand gradually. Sarah's mind raced through every interaction they'd had, every moment she'd trusted him. But something changed. What aren't you telling me? Marcus's expression darkened. What changed is that other people found out you were here. People who thought Elena Chen took their secrets to the grave. He gestured to the photographs on the walls. Your mother documented everything, every transaction, every crime, every dirty deal that passed through this house. She was building a case, gathering evidence. Evidence of what? Human trafficking, money laundering, murder. Marcus's voice was grim. This house was a way station, a place where very dangerous people conducted very dangerous business. Your mother was supposed to be just another asset, someone to keep the books and ask no questions. Sarah stared at the photographs with new understanding. The faces weren't random. They were victims and perpetrators, a carefully catalogued record of atrocities. But she was gathering evidence instead. She was going to expose everything. Then she found out she was pregnant with you. Marcus pulled out his phone, checking it with growing urgency. She had to choose between justice and keeping you safe. She chose you. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from outside, followed by the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Marcus cursed under his breath. "They found us," he said, moving quickly to a metal cabinet Sarah hadn't noticed before. He pulled out what looked like a hard drive and several manila envelopes. "We need to go, now." "Who found us?" But even as she asked, Sarah knew the answer. The same people her mother had been running from, the ones who had let her disappear because they thought their secrets had died with her. Marcus grabbed her arm, not roughly but with clear urgency. "There's a tunnel that leads from this room to the beach. Your mother had it built as an escape route." Sarah pulled back. "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me who you really are." "I'm exactly who I said I was," Marcus replied, his eyes darting to the ceiling as footsteps moved across the floor above them. "I'm someone trying to keep you alive. Your mother saved my sister from these people years ago. I owed her a debt." The footsteps upstairs grew more numerous, accompanied by voices speaking in low, urgent tones. Sarah could hear furniture being moved, drawers being yanked open. "Elena's daughter is here somewhere," a voice called out, muffled but audible. "The car's still warm." Marcus pressed the hard drive into Sarah's hands. "Everything your mother collected is on here. Every crime, every name, every piece of evidence. She wanted you to have it, but only if something like this happened." "Something like what?" "If they came for you." Marcus moved to what looked like a blank section of wall and pressed against it. A hidden panel slid aside, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. She hoped you could live a normal life, never knowing any of this, but she prepared for the worst. The basement door above them creaked open, and a beam of flashlight cut through the darkness. Sarah heard the whisper of footsteps on the wooden stairs. "Go," Marcus whispered urgently. "The tunnel leads to a cave system beneath the cliffs. Follow it to the beach and keep going north until you reach the lighthouse. There's a boat waiting." "What about you?" Marcus was already moving toward the main basement, positioning himself between the hidden room and whoever was coming down those stairs. "I'm going to buy you time. Go now, Sarah. Your mother didn't sacrifice everything just so you could die in the same basement where she hid her secrets." The photograph trembled in Sarah's hands as she stared at her grandmother's face, young and radiant, standing beside a man she'd never seen before. But it wasn't just any man. It was the same face she'd seen in the newspaper clipping about the missing researcher, Dr. Marcus Webb. The timestamp on the back read 1962, 3 years before her mother was born. "That's impossible," she whispered, sinking into the dusty chair. Her grandmother had always claimed Sarah's grandfather died in Korea, a war hero who never came home. But here was proof of another man, someone who looked at her grandmother with undeniable love and familiarity. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her mounting anxiety. Sarah pressed her hand to her belly, trying to calm herself, but her mind raced through the implications. If Dr. Webb was her real grandfather, then her presence in this house wasn't coincidence. It was destiny, twisted and dark. She heard footsteps on the porch and quickly shoved the photograph into her jacket pocket. The front door creaked open, and Detective Morrison's voice called out, "Mrs. Chen? We need to talk." Sarah's heart hammered as she made her way to the living room, where Morrison stood with another officer she didn't recognize. The detective's expression was grim, his usual professional courtesy replaced by something harder. "We found something in your rental car," Morrison said without preamble. "Blood. Fresh blood that doesn't belong to you." "What?" Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "That's impossible. I haven't—" "The blood matches what we found at Dr. Webb's old laboratory, the one that was broken into last week." Morrison's eyes never left her face. "Want to explain how that happened?" Sarah's mouth went dry. She thought about the night she'd followed the maps, the cuts on her hands from crawling through the broken fence, the way she'd scraped her palms on the concrete floor, but admitting she'd been there would only make things worse. "I cut myself on some glass," she said carefully, "at the grocery store. The cashier saw it happen." Morrison nodded to the other officer, who made a note. "We'll check that out. But I have to ask, did you know your grandmother worked for the Meridian Research Institute?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself, feeling the photograph in her pocket like a lead weight. "No, she worked at the phone company. According to our records, Elena Vasquez was employed by Meridian from 1961 to 1964 as a research assistant. Specifically, she worked in Dr. Webb's department." Morrison watched Sarah's reaction carefully. "Funny thing is, all records of her employment were supposed to be destroyed in a fire, but we found backup files in a safety deposit box registered to Dr. Webb." Sarah's vision blurred at the edges. Everything was connected: her grandmother, Dr. Webb, this house, even her own birth. It was all part of some elaborate design she couldn't fully grasp. "There's more," Morrison continued. "We've been monitoring your phone calls, Mrs. Chen, the conversations with someone called the benefactor. Very interesting discussions about keeping secrets and protecting investments." "You've been tapping my phone?" Sarah's voice rose in disbelief and anger. "You can't do that. This is insane." Sarah backed away from him, her hands instinctively protecting her belly. "I never met Dr. Webb. I don't even know what this Meridian Institute is." But even as she said it, fragments of memory surfaced. Her grandmother's nightmares, the way she'd sometimes speak in her sleep about the children and what they did to them, the odd medical equipment in the basement, the soundproofed rooms, the journals filled with observations about pregnancy and childbirth. Morrison pulled out his handcuffs. "Sarah Chen, you're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Marcus Webb and suspected involvement in—" A gunshot shattered the window behind them, sending glass exploding across the room. Morrison threw himself forward, pushing Sarah to the ground as another shot rang out. The other officer was already on his radio, calling for backup. "Stay down!" Morrison shouted, drawing his weapon. Sarah crawled behind the couch, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Through the broken window, she caught a glimpse of a figure moving through the dunes, tall, wearing a long coat, face obscured by the setting sun. The benefactor had finally decided to clean up loose ends, and Sarah realized with crystal clarity that she was never meant to survive this game. She was simply the last piece of evidence that needed to be eliminated. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the birth certificate clutched between her fingers. The paper felt ancient, yellowed with age, but the name written in faded ink made her blood run cold. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, born October 15, 1995, intent. Her birth date, her name. But Whitmore wasn't her maiden name. It was the name carved into the headstone she'd found in the basement. The sound of footsteps on the porch made her freeze. Through the window, she could see Detective Morrison approaching the front door, his expression grim. She quickly stuffed the certificate into a jacket pocket and tried to compose herself, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Mrs. Chen," Morrison called out as he knocked. "We need to talk." Sarah opened the door, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Detective, what brings you here so late?" "May I come in? There have been some developments in our investigation that directly concern you." His eyes were hard, searching her face for something she couldn't identify. She stepped aside reluctantly, her mind racing. How much did he know? As Morrison entered, his gaze immediately went to the open basement door behind her. "Been doing some exploring?" he asked casually. But there was nothing casual about the way his hand rested near his weapon. "Just trying to figure out why the previous owners left so suddenly," Sarah replied, closing the front door. She noticed Morrison position himself between her and the exit, a tactical move that made her stomach drop. "Funny you should mention that." Morrison pulled out a manila folder from his jacket. "Because, according to our records, the previous owners didn't leave suddenly. They died here, Mrs. Chen, 27 years ago, Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "That's impossible," the real estate agent said. "The real estate agent who doesn't exist?" Morrison interrupted. "We checked. Sandra Mills, the woman who sold you this house, has no license, no office, and no legal right to sell property. The deed you signed? It's a forgery." The room began to spin. Sarah gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "I don't understand. If that's true, then who—" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Morrison opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. "Do you recognize this woman?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The black and white photo showed a young woman holding a baby, standing in front of the very house they were in now. The woman's face was partially obscured by shadows, but something about her bone structure, the way she held her shoulders, seemed hauntingly familiar. I'm not sure," Sarah stammered, but her voice betrayed her uncertainty. Morrison studied her reaction carefully. Her name was Elena Whitmore. She and her husband purchased this house in 1995, just before their daughter was born. 6 months later, neighbors reported a terrible smell. When police investigated, they found both parents dead in the basement. Murder-suicide, according to the official report. "What happened to the baby?" Sarah whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. "That's where it gets interesting. The baby girl, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, vanished without a trace. Child Services had no record of her. No relatives came forward. It was as if she simply disappeared. Morrison's eyes never left Sarah's face. Until now." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her pocket, feeling the birth certificate's sharp edges through the fabric. "You think I'm that baby?" "I think someone wants us to think you're that baby," Morrison corrected. "The question is why? And who's been planning this for 27 years? A new sound made them both freeze, a car door slamming outside. Through the window, Sarah could see headlights cutting through the darkness. A figure was walking toward the house, moving with purpose. Morrison immediately drew his weapon. "Get behind me," he ordered Sarah. "We're going out the back." But before they could move, the front door opened with a soft click. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she recognized the silhouette in the doorway. "Hello, Sarah." The voice was warm, familiar, and absolutely terrifying in its normalcy. "I've been waiting so long for you to come home." It was her adoptive mother, Catherine, the woman who had raised her, loved her, taught her everything she knew about life. But the person standing in the doorway wasn't the gentle mother Sarah remembered. This woman's eyes held a cold calculation that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Catherine?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Finishing what should have been finished 27 years ago," Catherine replied, stepping into the house. In her hand was something that made Morrison curse under his breath, a gun held with the steady grip of someone who knew how to use it. "You see, darling," Catherine continued, her voice taking on that familiar maternal tone that now sounded like poison, "some secrets are too dangerous to let live, even when they grow up to become the daughter you never had." Sarah felt the world tilt on its axis as understanding crashed over her. Everything, the house, the adoption, her entire life, had been orchestrated by the woman she'd called Mother. The basement felt different now that Sarah knew the truth. The musty air seemed to whisper secrets as she descended the creaky stairs, her pregnant belly making each step more precarious. Behind her, Detective Morrison's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating cobwebs that danced like ghostly fingers. "Are you sure about this?" Morrison asked, his voice tight with concern. "We could wait for the forensics team." Sarah shook her head, one hand pressed against the wall for support. "I've waited 28 years to understand why my mother abandoned me. I won't wait another minute." The hidden room behind the false wall gaped open like a wound. Sarah's earlier discovery of the loose brick had revealed more than just her mother's hiding place. It had unveiled a shrine to guilt and desperation. Newspaper clippings covered every surface, yellowed headlines screaming about missing persons and unsolved murders spanning 3 decades. But it was the photographs that made Sarah's blood run cold. Pictures of women, all young, all with dark hair like hers, like her mother's. Red X marks had been drawn across most of their faces, and in the corner of each photo the same initials appeared, R.C. Robert Carver. Morrison breathed, reading over her shoulder. Jesus Christ, Sarah. Your mother wasn't running from your father, she was running from a serial killer. Sarah's hands trembled as she picked up a leather journal from the makeshift shrine. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, documenting a nightmare that had consumed her life. The entries began cheerfully enough, a young woman excited about her new beach house, her pregnancy, her future, but the tone shifted dramatically after the first month. He's been watching me. I see him on the beach at night, always just far enough away that I can't be sure. But I know it's him. The same man from the diner, the one who smiled when I told him I was alone here. Sarah flipped through more pages, her heart hammering as the story unfolded. Robert Carver had been a charming local handyman who'd helped her mother with repairs around the house. But charm had given way to obsession, and obsession to something far darker. Found another one today, under the floorboards in the kitchen. How many women came before me? How many thought they were safe in this house? The journal entries became increasingly frantic. Her mother had discovered that the house wasn't just affordable because of its remote location. It was a hunting ground. Carver had used it to lure vulnerable women seeking fresh starts or escaping their own troubles. The soundproof basement room hadn't been built for storage. Look at this, Morrison said grimly, pointing to a section of the wall. Fresh scratches marred the wood, fingernail marks, some still stained with brown that might have been blood. This is recent, Sarah. Within the last few years. Sarah's breath caught. But that's impossible. The real estate agent said the house had been empty for decades. Real estate agents lie, Morrison said flatly, especially when they're in on it. A sound from upstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the living room floor. Sarah grabbed Morrison's arm, her eyes wide with terror. He's here, she whispered. Robert Carver. He's still alive. Morrison drew his weapon, motioning for Sarah to stay behind him. They crept up the basement stairs, each step seeming to echo like thunder. The footsteps above had stopped, but Sarah could feel a presence waiting in the darkness beyond the basement door. When they reached the top, Morrison carefully turned the handle. The door was locked from the outside. "Sarah Chen," a voice called from beyond the door, cultured and smooth. "I've been waiting so long to meet you. You look just like your mother, you know. Even prettier, perhaps." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "You killed her. You killed my mother." A low chuckle drifted through the wood. "Oh no, my dear. Your mother was far too clever for that. She escaped, but not before she promised me something wonderful. She promised me that someday her daughter might return to finish what we started." "You're insane," Sarah spat, but even as she said it, pieces clicked into place. The affordable price, the eager real estate agent, the convenient timing of her desperate search for a home. She hadn't stumbled upon this house, she'd been led here. Your mother left something for you, Sarah, something hidden in that shrine she built to torment me. But you'll never find it now. This house has been hungry for so long, and you're going to feed it one last time." The smell of gasoline began seeping under the door. Morrison was already on his radio calling for backup, but Sarah knew it would be too late. The nearest help was 20 minutes away, and gasoline burned fast. She pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing the danger. Her mother had survived this nightmare, had escaped to give Sarah life. Now Sarah had to find a way to survive for her own child. The first orange glow appeared beneath the door. The salt air carried the scent of freedom as Maya stood on the beach behind her house, watching Detective Rodriguez's car disappear down the coastal road. The morning sun painted the waves in shades of gold and amber, nothing like the sinister grey they'd appeared when she first arrived 6 months ago, heavy with secrets and fear. Her hand rested on her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of her daughter. The daughter she now knew would grow up free from the shadows that had haunted 3 generations of women before her. The baby kicked, as if sensing the weight that had finally lifted from their shared future. "She's going to be a fighter," Maya whispered. surprised by the smile that came so naturally now. The house behind her looked different in the clear morning light. No longer the ominous structure that had harbored decades of violence and control. It was just a building, weathered, cedar and glass, that would soon belong to someone else. The realtor would arrive this afternoon with the papers. Maya had decided to sell it furnished, wanting nothing from this place except the truth she'd fought so hard to uncover. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sarah Chen. Saw the news. "How are you holding up? Office is always open if you need to talk." Maya typed back quickly. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Thank you for everything." The therapy sessions had been Dr. Chen's idea, starting in those first terrifying weeks when Maya couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop looking over her shoulder for threats that might emerge from every shadow. But talking through the trauma had helped her separate her mother's fears from her own reality, helped her understand that Patricia's paranoia had been both a symptom of her abuse and a shield that had ultimately saved Maya's life. A pelican landed on the deck railing, tilting its ancient head to study her with one dark eye. Maya laughed, remembering how every sound, every movement outside these walls had once sent her into panic. The bird seemed to nod before launching itself back toward the waves. Inside the house, Maya moved through the rooms systematically, packing the last of her personal belongings into boxes marked for her new apartment in Portland. The hidden room behind the kitchen had been sealed by police, its contents catalogued as evidence. She'd never seen inside it herself. Rodriguez had insisted on that, saying some images couldn't be unseen. Maya was grateful for his protection. She had seen the photographs they'd found there, the documentation of 17 years of systematic stalking and harassment that Marcus Holloway had inflicted on her mother. Pictures taken through windows, copies of medical records somehow obtained, detailed notes about Patricia's daily routines and the slow progression of her pregnancy. The evidence painted a picture of obsession so complete, so methodical, that Maya finally understood why her mother had run so far and hidden so completely. The final piece had been Patricia's journal, hidden in a safety deposit box whose key Maya found sewn into the lining of her mother's favorite coat. The entries revealed a young woman's journey from naive trust to growing terror as she realized the man she'd dated briefly in college had never let her go. Marcus had followed Patricia from California to Maine, taking the job at the real estate office specifically to monitor her life, to control her choices, to wait for the perfect moment to reclaim what he believed belonged to him. He'd bought the beach house through a shell corporation, then manipulated circumstances to ensure Patricia would buy it from him, thinking she was getting a miraculous deal on her dream home. Instead, she'd walked into an elaborate trap, complete with hidden cameras and secret spaces where Marcus could watch and wait. The pregnancy had accelerated his timeline. The journal's final entries spoke of Patricia's growing awareness that she was being watched, her desperate plans to fake her own death and disappear forever rather than bring a child into Marcus's twisted web. Maya paused at the kitchen window, looking out at the spot where they'd found her mother's remains. Patricia had never made it out of the house that final night, but her sacrifice had bought Maya 28 years of freedom, 28 years that Marcus had spent believing his prize was lost forever. Until Maya's pregnancy announcement appeared in the local newspaper's engagement section, a routine social media post that Marcus's automated searches had flagged. Suddenly, Patricia's daughter was right where he wanted her, living in his carefully prepared cage. But Maya wasn't her mother. She'd fought back, uncovered the truth, and survived to see justice done. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Maya smiled. "We're going to be okay," she murmured. "We're going to be more than okay." She picked up the last box, took one final look at the house that had nearly destroyed her, and walked away toward the sunlight streaming through the open door. Behind her, the waves crashed against the shore with the same rhythm they'd kept for centuries, washing away footprints and secrets alike, making space for whatever would come next.